Greetings to you, my friends out there in all corners of this universe of power. Welcome to Titan Talk. My name is Gabriel Pena. Many of you know me as the Texas Titan. I am on the verge of heading on a cross-country road trip today. And I wanted to make sure to get this episode recorded and out to you all because I've got some juicy information in store on some very keenly interested topics. But as I said, I'm about to embark on a road trip. Many of you all will see me at the official Strongman Games in a couple days out in Daytona, Florida. Now, travel plans have kind of gotten a little bit astray due to tropical storm / Hurricane Nicole making landfall exactly where official Strongman Games will be. So I know the competition got pushed from a 3-day competition to a 2-day event on Saturday and Sunday instead of Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. But I'm heading over there to do commentary on the entire event with Big Laws, Lawrence Chalet over there, and it's a very much a dream gig come true. I love commentary. I love commentating. I have a deep passion for this sport, and getting to share the microphone with Big Laws, that's a dream come true in a lot of ways. He's an inspiration, was a role model, especially as I was coming into the sport. So I'm really looking forward to being out there in Daytona. With the hurricane and the storm, flights all got canceled last minute, so decided, hey, why not make a road trip out of it? Throw the family in the Subaru and let's get out there and go see some nature after all is said and done with commentating the event. But I cannot wait to be out there. It's going to be one hell of a powerful weekend. For those that are not aware, the official Strongman Games is the world's strongest man and world's strongest woman for weighted class athletes. And of course, for the open men's heavyweights, that is their ticket into a Giants live show. So this is high stakes stuff. And you have athletes, elite level athletes from all corners of the world coming together to this event. And I could not be more excited to see it all take place right before me. I mean, I'm definitely going to be looking at a lot of future rivals. I'm going to have a lot of current rivals there too who are showing up just like myself to take part in the event one way or another. So heading out to Daytona, Florida in a couple of hours. We've got 19 hours between me here in South Texas and that East Coast over there. But looking forward to it. Looking forward to some mountains up in the Appalachian area afterwards, and going to see if I can soak up a bit of fall color before it's all gone. But aside from my travels out to Daytona, life has been going pretty well. I mean, it has been an adjustment moving from closing down my gym, Alpha Fit, and to get back into a more self-sustaining training mode here at home. I had some big plans to create a whole new, from the ground up, outdoor gym training area. But the reality, that's going to take some time and a lot of money. So I got a nice little training area set up in my garage, and it's functioning quite well. I've been getting some good workouts in there. I got to do some really good heavy hex bar deadlifts the other day, along with some squats. And, you know, it always takes like a good, heavy, kick your ass sort of leg day to really get you feeling good again and right back on track. But training's going well. My baby girl is just growing so fast, and she's right on the verge of taking those first steps all on her own. She's babbling and saying mama, and I'm just fully investing myself into being a dad, immersing myself in growing here from home, and just looking ahead towards the future. But I always appreciate all the love and messages and people checking up to see how I'm doing. I know it's been an adjustment for me, and sometimes it seems like I'm going dark, but I'm really just focused on raising my daughter and not spending quite as much time on social media or stuff in the past. So I've got lots of good content coming y'all's way. I've been noticing that the internet seems to love getting glimpses as to how strongmen eat. So I've got some good cooking stuff coming your way as well. But be on the lookout for that. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's going to be growing, and that's where I'm going to be throwing all that content out there too. So I got a new drone for people to check out. I'm going to be getting some really sick aerial footage there. It's a nice long-range drone, so you can expect to see some good mountain dives, and if I can get some good shots of fall foliage while I'm up in the East Coast, then you can count on that too. But anyways, let's get on to the juicy stuff. So today's podcast is centered around 3 topics, and these are 3 topics of interest that I've gotten lots of questions about in the past. I want to make sure to address them and answer them and just give a lot of information for people to kind of have a sense of direction when navigating these areas. So the first of which is the warm-up. The warm-up, the base starting point of every physical effort that we have and do in training. And it's a way that we get our bodies kind of kicked into gear and prepared for whatever trials of labor or exertion are ahead. And this could be physical trials or mental trial. Now, for the sake of today's podcast, I'm going to be talking more along the lines of physical trials, warm-ups as if I was going into a strength training session. But of course, there are a lot of things in life that we could benefit from a quote-unquote warm-up to kind of pave the way in terms of mental stimulation or getting the body ready for the task at hand before it's even happened. So when it comes to the warm-up, what exactly is the point of warming up? Well, the idea is to get the body moving in a way that starts to prime all the systems that we are going to use in whatever physical task or physical trial is actually ahead for a body to do. So instead of just jumping right in to what could potentially be a very high strain, high impact activity, we want to kind of ease our way into it, especially if the body has been, off for a while or relaxing, or if the metabolism has not been on. We want to kind of, you need to think of either your computer starting up or your car starting up. It takes some time for these things to have, the circuitry, the electricity, the fire be moving through their systems to where everything is operating well. But there is that little bit of lag from when you turn it on to where it's actually performing at 100%. And it's kind of like what the warm-up is. So by doing this, we can really decrease our potential for injury as well. If I have Atlas stones, let's use that as the example. Of course, I like the notion of being able to jump right into any stone at any given moment and lifting the damn thing. But if I warm myself up steadily, if I do some bicep curls, some air squats, maybe some kettlebell swings, activate the abs with some sit-ups, little things like this, well, now I've given some good blood flow to all the different areas of my body that I'm about to be using rather than just jump into them cold. So we can prevent a lot of injuries by increasing this blood flow, establishing a good sense of circulation. And keep in mind that circulation, our circulatory system, is our delivery system to get nutrients to the muscles and to pull waste away from the muscles. It's a circle, the circulatory system, but we want to make sure that those channels are nice and open, and sometimes they're constricted, especially when we've been relaxing for a while, or if we're starting a new day, waking up from sleep. So blood flow and opening those channels is an objective of warming up, and then it's in the name, warmth. We want to warm up the body. This time of year, too. This is the cold time of year. It's starting to get cooler. Temperatures are dropping. Days are getting shorter. When we are relaxing, the body could very much be in a physically cold environment. And when you think of cold, think of things shrinking, those pathways constricting. And when it's hot, these open up. They tend to dilate more. So whether we need to warm ourselves up by putting on more layers or actually moving, it is essential before activity that we get some warmth going on. And with that warmth comes flexibility, open pathways, open channels, dilated areas of travel in the circulatory system. Just going through motion, this lubricates joints, warms them up. They're not so cold anymore. They're more pliable. And most of all, they're not prone to snap on you. We definitely don't have any time for snapping joints up in here. Another aspect of warming up that's very useful and why we do it is mental stimulation. Before you've even done a task, if you can go through it to a lesser degree, whether it's, sub-weight, just in your head, going through it, if you can repeat it without actually going through the full exertion of the trial ahead, you have better paved your success because you've already done it to a degree. So there's a significant amount of mental stimulation to be gained by warming up, just by going through the motions or seeing what's about to happen kind of take place in your head before it does. It's kind of like getting to do the thing before it actually takes place. And then neuromuscular recruitment. This is the final kind of like facet to why we warm up. Neuromuscular recruitment, neuro-mind, muscular body, mind-to-body connection. If we go into a physical endeavor cold. You got to picture those circuits, right? Our body, our mind connects to our muscles through electric circuits. And just like I used the the metaphor of of comparing this to our computer starting up. If we warm up and we get these circuits moving with electricity frequently, well, all of these circuits are hot and they're ready. The ease of transmission from mind to muscle is heightened. And that's what we want. We don't want the connection speed of our mind telling our muscles to be at 70%. We want that at 100% all the time. And the way to get there is usually through warm-up. So keep that in mind. That's the basic premise of why we warm up. But before I go into any further details, I had the opportunity to meet with the man who is at the helm of the healthcare and keeping this body running facet of my team, Steve Martinez. He is a doctor of functional medicine who has a clinic, Restore Wellness RGV, in McAllen, and I always cherish the times that I get to go and visit with him, catch up, talk game plan and strategy, and just envision the road ahead for myself. And on this recent visit that I went to go see him, I took the opportunity to interview him and see what he had to say on the topics of today's podcast. So, on the topic of warming up, let's drop in on Steve Martinez and see what he has to say. Steve, it's so good to be here. We're at your clinic, Restore Wellness RGV, here in McAllen. We've gone through a little checkup to realign all my plans going forward and, of course, have your insight. But I have some questions for you.
Absolutely.
These questions have been kind of boiling in the back of my mind. I get a lot of feedback from fans, from followers, and athletes wanting to know a lot of the answers to these that I'm going to ask you. The first one has to deal with the warm-up.
Yeah.
When an athlete is going through a warm-up for any type of training session, what boxes should they be checking off in terms of the purpose that warm-up serves?
Yeah.
What physiologically, what things need to be taking place to optimize the athlete's performance?
Right. So there's different mindsets and different thoughts when it comes down to this. But for one, first and foremost, I always recommend, when you begin a warm-up, it's going to be as comfort will allow. You don't want to go too quickly or too fast when warming up because it's a warm-up, right? You want to kind of get the muscles going. And think of the muscles as like silly putty. You want to warm it up. If you have silly putty and you stretch it real quick, what's it going to do? It's going to snap, right? So think of your muscles as like silly putty to really kind of get the circulation going, the oxygen going. Start slow. You don't need to have a fast warm up. At least you shouldn't have a fast warm up. So things just like simple things like air squats and lunges and just things to kind of get the big muscles kind of, going again, especially with the sport that you participate in. Even things like arm circles, or just the neck, things that you just like, well, I'm not gonna waste my time doing that, but you'd be surprised the little things we do, how it can make a big difference. Another thing that people talk about a lot is stretching. There's two types of stretching, static and dynamic stretching. So a lot of times the dynamic stretching is a stretching that is almost like the warm-up. You're kind of doing these little exercises and calisthenics to kind of get the body going. Static stretching is mostly like this, kind of static stretching. Now I don't recommend doing static stretching before an event because it could actually, I won't say loosen, but it kind of reduce the strength of the tendons and the ligaments and the muscles, especially during explosive events or endurance events. If we have some runners, watching this. But so static stretching is mostly, I recommend, done even after an event has taken place. But before an event, we want to do more dynamic stretching and start low and go slow to really get the blood flowing in your body and not again, hurt your body because it's supposed to be a very low-key, low-impact warm-up to get you ready for your event. So,
now with this time of year, the colder time, here in the Rio Grande Valley, cold is a very subjective word.
Ooh, that's 70 degrees.
For any listeners or viewers who live somewhere a lot more frigid, when you're going into a training environment that's in the 40s, the 30s, what extra attention do you have to give to your warm-up in terms of promoting a warm environment within the body?
Yeah, you have to. So take that extra time. Don't schedule a time. Last 10 minutes, I'm gonna go out there and just kind of go as quickly as I can. So you want to kind of, even supplementation. Different things that you can do to kind of help get the blood flowing, like nitric oxide, or even things like beet juice or niacin. These types of things, niacin is a precursor for glutathione. You're really one of the most important antioxidants. Kind of get the body woken up, because really what we're talking about is we're talking about cellular health. When the cells are happy and healthy and able to function, we will be able to function. And what we're talking about is getting the mitochondria warmed up, woken up. So it's not just, hey, I'm warming up my muscles. It's like, hey, what's going on inside the muscles that's actually really doing the warming up? What's actually, getting you ready for your event? And that's actually within the cells. So things like that, proper hydration. Hydration, for people who want to take it to the next level, is hydration plus hydrogen. Hydrogen is one of the smallest molecules that actually enters a cell to help kind of wake up the mitochondria, which is like the engine for our cells. To get it going. And once these things start clicking, that is how we're truly warming up. So when we talk about, again, doing air squats or push-ups or arm circles or whatever we want to do for our routine, what we're doing is we're waking up the cells. We're waking up our mitochondria, we're getting the blood flowing again, and that's how we achieve proper, technique and warm-ups to get you ready for an event. So especially with the colder weather, we want to get the body kind of going again. So even things like, what you wear, and what you drink before an event is very important. So I like doing things that help kind of open the pipes, get the circulation going. So again, I'm a big fan of nitric oxide. I'm a big fan of, the green juices. I'm a big fan of the beet juices. I'm a big fan of the niacin and the glutathione and the vitamin C and things like that before an event, because that can really help you perform that much better.
To reiterate, I'm hearing vasodilators, open up those pathways. I'm hearing warm up the powerhouse of the cell, the mitochondria. And then I'm hearing hydration, the delivery system of all these nutrients in and out of the cells. Is there any last link there? I feel like there also has to be a final little brick of mental stimulation as well.
Oh, absolutely. The visualization, I said is 90% mental. So really kind of focusing. Sometimes we get in, my sport, is kind of opposite of yours. I was more of an endurance athlete, right? The Ironman triathlon and things like that. And sometimes you get into environments like, oh my gosh, that water is cold, or hey, it's raining outside. I'm not sure how we're going to do on the bike, or it's extremely, the humidity's, 78%, in Florida, and it's like, man, I got to run my marathon on this. So it's all about the mindset as well. So really, this is something I'm studying right now, as I'm trying to, further my knowledge in the medical mindset as far as like just the visualization. That could be a warm-up as well. You can have the best supplements, you can have the best warm-up, you can have the best gear, you can prepare yourself, for the best, training before the event. But if you get to that event and you don't have that mindset of, hey, I'm going to crush it, or hey, I had the fear, I'm not sure, it's not the perfect environment, I'm not sure what I'm going to do, I'm scared now, forget about it. So yeah, warming up the brain. The brain, we can't forget the brain is a muscle. So what we tell ourselves, what we tell our brain is going to have a dramatic impact, not only at that moment, but how you're going to participate in that event, the results you're going to get. It's like, are you going to cross that finish line? Are you going to get to that destination? Or are you going to stop short? So I think that's going to be one of the main things too, is as far as like the meditation before an event. Taking time, 5 minutes, go into a quiet environment if you can, close your eyes, breathing techniques. I think breathing, warming up the diaphragm is very, very important, especially, during explosive events and, actually all events in general. But warming up the body in that way is going to be very, very important. So I think if people can really kind of take time to really just kind of meditate and to visualize themselves, you're warming the main muscle up, because if your mind is out of it, well, it's going to be a difficult day.
Oh, absolutely. So you're very much getting the physical infrastructure of the body warmed up, the blood pathways, but you're also getting that neuromuscular structure warmed up too.
You have to.
Good way of taking charge of whatever task lies ahead.
Yeah, and I tell the clients I work with, start from the top down. Start with your head. Kind of get you the mental aspect and mindset and foundation going, and then kind of work to the neck and the shoulders and the biceps and the abs, the diaphragm. Just kind of have a system. Because you're kind of bouncing all over the place. Like, hey, well, it's the routine. And routines don't take any effort, but routines help us throughout the day. Hey, we get up, we get dressed, we brush our teeth, we take a shower, or whatever. It's routines that help us feel that comfort. And that that familiarity to say, hey, this is what I need to do to help get there. So if you, like we used to say in the military, fight like you train like you fight. So we want to train, like we're going to go into a battle, a competition. So if you actually do that before and practice your routine prior to the event, warming up, mindset, nutrition, hydration, or whatever, you're going to have that foundation, on game day. So,
champion of mind, champion of body.
There you go.
I always love getting to hear Steve talk about these things. He's a guy that definitely has a passion and a knowledge for all of the subject matter that he has studied and now shares his knowledge base with the patients under his care. But, he had to reiterate a lot of the key points in what the whole idea behind a warm up is and what we're trying to make happen. A lot of the processes that need to occur, we need to have blood flow. We have to open up the delivery system. Now, usually this takes place by doing a very light strained motion and doing it repeatedly over a certain amount of time. This is kind of like the first objective as you're getting into the warm up or as you're getting into a training situation, period, is let me start opening up pathways. Remember, I told you at the start of this segment here that our circulatory system is our delivery system. It is powered by blood and water, to act as a shuttle to transport nutrients to muscle tissue and all other tissues and to pull waste out and to kind of keep that circle of nutrients and waste moving throughout the body. And we need to keep this single aspect in mind as we approach a training session. Before I can go into if I'm going to be doing stretching that day, if I'm going to be doing elaborate compound lifts that day, my main objective is let me get some blood flow. So for me, usually that involves going on a power walk, maybe getting on the air bike for about 5 minutes, doing some air squats. If I did the air squats, thinking of the comparison of a walk to a bike to air squats, that would be a lot of reps. Typically if I do air squats in a warm up, I'm thinking of 50 reps without stopping. It might be at a steady pace, not trying to get them done as fast as possible, but you can imagine that by the end of those 50 reps, my quads got a good pump to them, the glutes, the hamstrings, all the muscles of the lower leg, and even the abdominals, the core. It has to be stabilizing my body as I go up and down. So this is kind of like the ideal movement in which we get that warmth, we get that circulation. Pathways are starting to open. Now, another objective that Steve kind of touched on is that the warm-up kind of kickstarts our cells down to the cellular level. That you remember back to very early biology, thinking of the cell itself. You've got all the little organelles inside the cell, one of which is the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. That's where cellular respiration and energy metabolism takes place. You need to get all these little mitochondria nice and active, just like the metabolism for our body, the big total metabolism. The metabolism of the cell, especially the cells that are going to be put to use, needs to be primed just like our metabolism for the body. So going through this warm-up phase, whether it lasts from 5 minutes to 30 minutes, is essential to kickstart all those little tiny energy reactors in every single one of the cells, especially the muscle cells that we're about to be using. So we don't want those little powerhouses going into it cold just like us. We want to make sure that they are up at 100% activation and efficiency, ready to metabolize any energy needed to translate over to optimum physical performance. How does the warming up benefit us? What is the point of doing this? Of course, above all else, the biggest one is keeping your performance optimized and securing your longevity in these performance endeavors. The body is an amazing, resilient thing. It's the nature's most incredible machine. But at the same time, you have to appreciate how our bodies are not superhuman. They do have imperfections, they do have faults, and they do have things that they have to recover from on a daily basis. So we can get by without warming up for quite a while. There is always that always ready appeal. No matter what the task is, I've trained my body to be ready for it to where I can just jump right in. And yeah, that's great, and that's real world strength, and you want to have that. But there is a very real point where if you do not take the time to warm up, that the compounded stress of each physical endeavor that you have, of each trial of your labor, they will start to compound and add up. And at one point, your failure to warm up comprehensively or to warm up enough will result in something getting strained. And the most frustrating thing about that scenario is that strain, a minor injury or even a major injury, could have been avoided by some preventative measures. In other words, warming up. So the idea of having this warm up is a way to secure not having setbacks in oneself. And nobody got time for setbacks, especially if you have grand goals, whether it's to become a professional athlete or whether it's to compete in your first contest or whether it's to cut X amount of pounds of body fat and look however you want going into the next year. Whatever it is, all these goals dramatically depend on your ability to stay consistent and regular with your bouts of physical effort. So this is kind of a way, the warm-ups are a way to always know that we're checking off all of these boxes and not leaving any stone unturned or room for error. When you have that, it's compounded progress. You know, you have these people who go into working out and they might not even do any warm-up. They'll go straight to whatever their first exercise is. Like, let's say you got this gym bro coming in for his bench day. Instead of doing any lacrosse ball to shoulders or band warm-ups to move his mobility, he jumps straight into the barbell bench press, just maybe does it a little bit lighter weight, and goes right in. And, you know, everyone has their own method. Maybe that works. But at a certain point, especially if your bench continues to grow, you've got a lot of muscles developing very fast, the deltoids, the pecs, the triceps. And then you have a lot of smaller muscles that don't necessarily get that same attention, like the rotator cuff, for example, that as the bench grows, those big muscles grow. If the rotator cuff is not addressed, at some point you're going to have such an imbalance that it can result in injury. Or if it's not even anything to do with the rotator cuff and you just go into a weight session cold and the weight that you did was just too much and you weren't warmed up for it, well, now we've got an injury that could have been avoided by warming up. So I can understand the appeal, especially when we start to feel lazy, of just wanting to go straight into the workout. And sometimes that is the best case scenario because you just simply have to work out, and not working out would be way worse than just diving in without a warm-up. But in those rare circumstances, you want to kind of just leave cushion for yourself for when they do have to happen, whether it's because of life stress, scheduling, work, babies, whatever it is. Leave yourself as much cushion by not doing those sessions often unless it's right out of dire necessity. Because our bodies, again, resilient machines, they can get by through it. But by having this warm-up, you're checking all these boxes off. You're not leaving room for those errors. And most of all, you're not leaving room for injuries to happen that could have been avoided. There's nothing worse sitting, feeling in that hole of self-pity and wallowing around in misery, thinking about how much it sucks to be hurt when all I could have done is just maybe spend 5 to 15 more minutes to avoid that. So it's such a small price to pay to avoid injury. So, you know, kind of talking about jumping right into a workout without warming up or with minimal warm-up versus spending a lot of time warming up. One thing that is often overlooked is that there is a very fine line that has to be walked effectively by the individual between warming up for too long and warming up for too short. And let me explain that further. Warming up for too long. This is something that we can easily get spoiled by our warm-ups, especially if we have had consecutive or regular injury over our history. So I kind of like to joke around that this long warm-up is very characteristic of the masters class athletes, the over 40 athletes. And that's just kind of like a little joke to where all the miles, you know, spent in the sport itself or the years spent in the sport have led to a list of injuries that have happened over the years. And with those injuries and an aging body, you got to spend a little bit more time warming up. But when you're warming up for a whole hour, you know, and don't get me wrong, there can be days where that just has to happen. But if it's happening all the time, you know, we're taking a lot away from ourselves, possibly, by giving so much time to our warm-up and not nearly much time for our workout itself. I'll go into that a little bit more, but on the flip side, there's warming up too short. Just like the example I used of the gym bro going in to do bench, not spending any time warming up at all, and just diving right into his first working sets. Um, the risk that individual runs is that they're not going to comprehensively warm up all the systems at play, and they might be leaving some room for error there in terms of muscles that aren't ready, joints that aren't ready, pathways that aren't open, just not creating a very nourishing and anabolic environment, an environment of growth. Versus you have the individual, the masters athlete taking their hour and a half warm up. Masters athletes, I'm sorry, it's a joke, but you all are good sports from being around in the sport for so long. You have the masters athlete who's spending an hour and a half warming up. They're going into the gym, they're hitting that foam roller, and they're laying down on that foam roller, getting every little ache and pain out from their lats, their glutes, their lower back. And they're on that foam roller for 15, 20 minutes. Then they're doing some active stretching. Then they're taking their time doing their band warm-ups, their rotator cuffs, their squats, their lunges, their yoga. By the time they're done warming up, they've already been at the gym for an hour and a half. And there's a couple things that are challenges with that aspect. One, if you have a set time frame that you can be there, you've used up such a bulk of your time. Now you are rushed with the actual really important stuff, the workload that you went there for. You're rushed, and you might be prone not to finish it all or not to get the best out of it. And to kind of add on to that even more, mental capacity. You walk into a training session with a certain amount of mental budget to face whatever you have ahead for that day. And if you've used so much mental focus, awareness, coordination, just energy itself on the warm up, I mean, you're very really left with a small amount, if any, to focus on the bulk of your workout after. And that's tough. That's a tough thing to do because the whole point of this warming up is to make sure that you're able to preserve your physical performance. So I can understand the idea of wanting to just give it your all and leave no stone unturned, but when it gets to a point where it's eating up all of your mental capacity to push through the workout as a whole, that's no good. And even more so, the big one on top of that is when you have the warm-up that lasts for so long, you have to keep in mind that we are on energy budgets. Our workout session is greatly dependent on whatever meal we had to support it. Typically, I like to recommend to my athletes, eat about 2 hours prior to your workout. 2 hours is long enough to where that food gets to metabolize. It's not weighing you down. It's not really actively digesting anymore. It has already been broken down to its core components, stored in the muscles as glycogen. Protein has been broken down to its smallest amino acids, and it's actively being used in the body to repair muscle or to get it ready to go. When you are warming up for an extended amount of time, you have to take into account how you structure your nutrition going in. Because if I ate 2 hours prior to a workout and then I take an hour to warm up, now it's essentially taking me 3 hours until I get to start working out. And a lot of these warm-up exercises do burn energy at the same time too. So you're burning time and you're burning energy. You really have to walk this line and walk it well, because these warm-ups, and I mean, they are essential in preserving your performance, but they can also break your performance. Training is what we use to make ourselves better. And if you can't count on training to be a positive and constructive asset or phase to your training, then you're not going to wind up making the progress that you originally set out to do in the first place, because your warm-up is actually taking away from you. So it's a weird phenomenon to think of the warm-ups as both being a plus and a negative, but it's only a negative if you wind up letting it go too long. And if you do have to have these long warm-ups, if my body is feeling beat and I know I'm going to have a long warm-up prior to like my next deadlift session, for example, then instead of eating 2 hours before, I'm going to eat 1 hour before. I'll do my warm-up while my body is still digesting a little bit, and by the time I'm done warming up, now I'm at that Goldilocks zone to where those nutrients have been broken down and are ready to be actively used. But these are things that you have to take into account. It is a big running formula in an equation. So these factors, although they are small factors in terms of deciding your warm-up and how to go about it, They're assets. They really are, because this is a concept. The warm up itself, it's an asset in your back pocket. The way you go about it can pave the way for the success that you have in your training session. And your training session paves the way for the success that you have in your career. And most importantly, when it comes time to competition, for those of us who are competitive athletes, the way that you warm up there in contest will greatly dictate your success on the event at hand. The one thing I will say about contest versus training is their frequency. Contests are they're once in a blue moon compared to training, which is many times a week. So the warm up that you see and encounter in training is the one that has more repetition throughout your life, versus the warm up that you have in competition. That's a very special circumstance type thing, but the importance is the same. You got to really navigate in a way that preserves your mental capacity, enhances your performance by giving your muscles adequate priming, opens up all the bloodway circulation channels, makes it easy to get nutrients in and pull waste out, promotes flexibility and warmth. And then in the long run, you wind up avoiding injury that could have been sustained otherwise. It's a good warm-up, I would say, in everyone. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing, but if it had to be, ideally 15 to 30 minutes, depending on the day. When you go over that 30-minute mark, and I'm talking, your foam rolling, your active stretching, your GPP movement, whatever you got going on, everything that is not your first working exercise, 15 to 30 minutes is a really good way to make sure that you keep yourself on track. But how would I structure a warm-up? And the warm-ups could be very different for any particular movement that you're doing. I know I'm a deadlift guy, and you all always love picking my brain about deadlifts, so I'll use deadlifts for an example. But if you have questions on warming up, if you need to know how to go about doing the warm-ups for your specific, weekly workouts, I've got spots on coaching, guys. If you want to have the Texas Titan as your coach, just simply reach out to me, and then you can have a pro in your corner, and we can talk all we want about how to structure your warm-up and everything else involving training. But let's think about the deadlift warm-up. If I'm going into a deadlift session, my first objective with warming up is probably getting in a power walk, moving around. Especially, I do a lot of computer work nowadays, whether it's taking care of my clients, editing content, whatever it is. I spend a lot of time sitting down. So when I get to that workout time, I want to move around a little bit. I want my body to be feeling itself in an ever-changing posture, articulating around the environment, getting that good circulation that way. And if I can't walk for whatever reason, then I'll get on an air bike or a rower. After I've gotten that blood flow from about 5 minutes of rowing or air bikes, then I'm going to think about actually use the muscles I'm going to be using for the power drive of the deadlift. I'll do some air squats. The deadlift is a push. It looks like a pull, and we will call it a pull, but it is your legs pushing the weight up off the ground. So you want those squat muscles to be ready to go. So whether it's air squats or a front-loaded goblet squat, I will do those probably 15 to 30 reps, maybe multiple sets. And then I'll start working on some unilateral stuff. I love doing single leg stiff leg deadlifts to attack each side of my posterior chain, the hamstrings and the glutes, without having the other one help it. So maybe I'll do 2 sets of 5 reps each side, single leg stiff leg deadlifts. Now I've gotten my squat muscles warmed up. I've gotten my posterior chain muscles warmed up a little bit, the hamstring area. I want to think about the upper back, maybe some face pulls with a band, maybe some one-arm rows with a dumbbell or a kettlebell, but I want to get those lats, I want to get those traps, all the musculature in my upper back shoulder area warmed up to brace against the bar. So up until this point, we've gotten the warmth from either the walking, the biking, or the rowing. We've gotten the leg push muscles from the air squats. We've gotten the posterior chain from the single leg stiff leg deadlifts. We've gotten the upper back from the rows or the face pulls. And at that point, if you have anything else that is kind of just like really screaming at you or needs some attention, well, you've got maybe 1 or 2 exercises and plus or minus 10 minutes to work on those things. But that gives you a brief idea of kind of how to go about it, because after that, I dive right into my deadlifts. But You want to make sure that every area of the body, especially the ones that you're going to be using, are warmed up, are primed. Primed is a big word that I love to use. You're priming it to give its best performance. But you go into these things with a plan. Envision all the muscles that are going to be at play, all the systems that are going to be at play, and know that those are the ones that you really need to make sure they are primed and ready to go and give it their all. So, warm-up aside, the second area that I have gotten a lot of questions on, and one that I feel very strongly about, is the importance of our foundation. Importance of foundation is huge. You know, our physical power, anything that we can possibly do with our body, is generated by the rooted connection we have to the ground or the foundation that we walk on or operate on. And how effective that communication between us and the ground is greatly dictates our ability to exert our power. So this will come down to a topic of footwear. You know, one of the best way to navigate this world and to use our power is barefoot. But that can also be problematic depending on what you're walking on, especially if there's, you know, rough asphalt or glass and nails involved. And there's a certain level of unpredictability, and our feet are soft. And if we're going through rough terrain, we need to have some sort of, you know, bearing. That's where shoes come involved. But we're a species that we wear shoes. But let me just say that the more often you can wear nothing and just be walking around your bare feet, feeling that rooted connection to the ground, you're going to do a lot of good for your foot health and a lot of good for the nerves that lie there in the foot. So as we go into the importance of our foundation, it's essential to know that we are beautifully evolved organisms, and the way that we are currently is the result of thousands and thousands of years of adaptation and evolution. Our foot is shaped in the way that evolution has catered it to be. For our species to walk upright as Homo sapiens, you know, we have to have a foot that spreads out like a fan to give us a wide base to toggle back and forth, because we only have two bases of support as we walk each foot. But we're also very tall, so we need to have a base that has a supportive structure in the center, like a bridge, the arch of our foot. And that foot needs to be long so that we can teeter back and forth as well too. So every little physical aspect to our foot has evolved from our very early ancestors that maybe didn't even have feet, to those that started to crawl, to those that walked on four limbs, to those that started standing upright, to those that started ambulating and walking upright. Every aspect of our foot and the morphology of our foot has changed and adapted to be the best possible tool for us to use. So the shape of our foot itself is there for a reason. Everything is there for a reason. How we use our feet from our first steps to now is greatly important to kind of keep track of in the scope of our perspective. And it's very fresh in my mind because I'm getting to watch my daughter, you know, learn. She's been crawling for a while. She's got her sprint crawl going on, and now she's trying to take her first steps on her own. I mean, she's standing up on her own and watching the way her foot toggles and her ankle mobility, her knees, and just that natural reaction to gravity. And her feet are unaffected or unspoiled by a lot of the confines of footwear that we have nowadays. That there's just a very natural look. And you see how, you know, even in babies or young mammals in general, but let's talk about human babies for now, how when they step, every toe presses into the ground. They're using the whole pad of the foot from heel to toe to communicate and make those changes back and forth to figure out how they can hold themselves upright and move. And that communication, there's no barrier between them and the ground. It is 100% efficiency. And when you see the pinky toes dig into the ground just as much as the big toe does, you know that all those nerves are active and healthy. And that no matter what surface this little creature will walk on, they have the communication to kind of toggle back and forth and navigate it well. And this communication is, in another word, proprioception. Proprioception is our neural communication to the ground. It's our awareness of ourself in space and where we are in physical space. We have a neural network that goes down to the base of our foot. And a lot of these nerves, are in each toe, all throughout the foot, at the heel. So that whenever we step on anything, even if it's touching the sides of our foot, we can always feel it, and we can make those adjustments in very real time and keep ourselves operating in the most efficient and effective way possible. But this is proprioception. And, up until this point in modern history, footwear has traditionally been a certain way. I don't know where or why it got so skewed, but one of the worst things that footwear has generated and become over human history was a narrow toe-boxed shoe. A shoe that tapers to an edge like this rather than a paddle like a duck. Like if you look at our foot naturally, it's a paddle. It looks like a duck foot, just to kind of allude to that shape. You don't want to have that foot shaped like a Converse shoe. It's when all those feet are pointed to a tip, you don't get to have them splay. I was talking about my daughter, how I get to see every single one of her toes just press right there into the ground and communicate with it. When you have a shoe that confines all these toes together, now you have one point in the front and one point in the back, and you don't really have any toggle room there. And even more importantly, when you start throwing shoes into the mix, you have whatever sole that they have underneath them. So a very physical barrier between you and the ground. And that can greatly determine your ability to communicate and navigate well with whatever physical pursuit you're doing, whether it be strongman, marathon running, biking. All of these things greatly depend on your ability to communicate well, but they also demand certain factors of your footwear themselves, which we'll get into a little bit later. But recent science, especially in these last 2 decades, has come to the forefront. There's been a lot of research, a lot of discovery with how we can reshape our shoes to make them look more like the natural foot, nature's perfect machine. I don't know where or why or how we started to deviate away from the reality that nature's perfect machine is there for a reason. Let's not try to change into something it shouldn't be. Let's go off of what evolution is telling us, like this is how our feet are made to work. So what we wind up having now, and I started to see it really start to take a wave of momentum back in, let's say, like around 2012, 2010, like around that time when the Vibram 5-finger toe shoes came out. The shoes that have all the toes on them. They're still around nowadays, but I remember those first ones that came out. I mean, they were minimalist shoes. It was essentially a glove for your foot, and they looked weird. It was unlike anything we'd seen before, but the second I put those on and started moving around in them, it felt so natural, and it kind of unlocked this little part of my mind. I was like, this is the way things are supposed to be. And it really changed me to thinking about how my feet are working for me and how they could always be working better. So we are now starting to see shoes mimic the natural foot shape more. A wide paddle shape, a wide toe box. Maybe not necessarily so much enforcing in the arch. Maybe not necessarily so much midsole that locks your foot into place, but things in the shoes that allow the foot to move and communicate as it was naturally made to do. We start thinking about these aspects to footwear. Soles, midsoles, enforced arches, raised heels, narrow toe boxes. They all have their unique benefits and their unique cons to them too. So if you are a weightlifter, when you're squatting, deadlifting, it benefits you not to have a crazy big sole beneath you. And there are plenty of instances where we can use soles. But let me touch on that a little bit more. Let's say you're squatting, for an example, big weight. It benefits you heavily to be able to have every single bit of your proprioceptive nerves activate and to root you to the ground, making very real-time adjustments if needed to ensure your balance and power all the way through from start to finish. So versus an athlete who's a runner, they, of course, it would benefit them heavily to have that proprioception, but when you're running, it's a very long duration, a lot of high impact. The need for a sole between these two individuals is very different. We want a very thin, minimalist sole for the athlete who is weightlifting so that their feet can stay in constant contact and connection with the ground, an uninterrupted connection with the ground, versus the athlete who is a runner. You want a little bit more of a thicker sole, a cushy sole, something to help mitigate that constant impact over the miles and miles and miles they run. And then you think about midsoles. This is the section of your foot that has the arch involved. Enforced arches. Enforced arches are great for certain individuals that need that arch support. But what a lot of these arches have done is taken the muscle strength away from our foot that it actually uses to enforce the arch itself. Although the arch is a bone structure, it is there supported by muscles. And when these muscles get weak, whether it be from not using their feet enough, or whether it be from wearing footwear that has these arches and these structures that does the work for the body, now we start losing that muscular strength to support the arch itself. And so this kind of goes into a realm of a very real area of focus now for people who study feet, for athletes who suffer from it. When you have flat feet, it's not a death sentence, and you're not stuck with flat feet. There's a lot of ways in conditioning and training protocols and regimens that are widely available now to where you can steadily condition your feet and strengthen up those muscles again to where you can regain your arch. It's not impossible. It is very possible, but it is a process because you're having to revert so many years of bad posture maybe, or of wearing shoes that take a lot of away from your muscles in terms of work. And that's a tough thing when you're having to revert a lot of time. You have to spend a lot of time doing it. But another thing I want to get to is the raised heels. Raised heels are great, especially in weightlifting applications, in allowing for a little bit extra range of motion. By pitching that foot forward and raising the heel up, we've dramatically increased the ease of which we can have a deep squat, for example. It allows us to get deeper in our motions by not causing so much tension right there at the ankle joint just because of that pitch forward. So there are applications where you can use that raised heel, but what I will say on the raised heel, because it pitches the foot forward, it is very easy for the hips to pitch forward at the same time too. And even more so, whatever weight you're bearing, whether it's just your weight or an additional weight in weightlifting applications on its own, if you have a heel pitching you forward, it's very easy for you to have a lot of your weight on your toes without even knowing it. It's hard for you to make sure that you're cranking back and keeping an evenly dispersed weight load from heel to toe. And that's always the goal. No matter what you're doing, our feet are there for a reason. Unless you're up on in a particular stride or throwing a bar up on a push press or something where you come up on your tiptoes, it's always priority to get back down and have that foot locked into where you have all of your toes, the pads of your foot, and the heel locked in together at the same time, always evenly dispersing your load. The raised heel and how it can make the hips possibly toggle forward too can be problematic. If you're doing any sort of picks of weighted objects off the ground, deadlifts, stone lifts, odd object picks, and your hips are not neutral and they tip forward, well, now what has happened is you've lengthened a lot of those muscles on the backside before you've even gotten to go about doing what you're doing. So the hamstrings, for example, they're connected from, the knees to the back of the pelvis. If you tilt your pelvis forward, you've stretched that muscle. And now it's at a longer state. It's at a more vulnerable state. It's at a slightly weaker state. The longer the muscle is, the less explosive it is, the weaker, quote unquote, it is. So keep that in mind with raised heels too. They have their place for allowing more depth and ease of depth with limited ankle mobility, but there is a cost there. And the last factor I want to touch on is the narrow toe box, which I kind of explained on already, but I feel like this is the single most important factor in shoes nowadays. not having your feet so constricted to where it physically changes and deforms your feet, but a toe box that allows your feet to splay in every single one of those digits to stay in contact with the ground. And these are all factors that heavily translate over to efficiency, optimization, and performance increases when it comes time to go through whatever it is, even day-to-day tasks, walking around or, deadlifting 1,000 pounds. But I got to spend some time talking to Steve on his thoughts on foundational footwear and where his mind is at with them. So let's take a listen and see what Steve Martinez has to say about the importance of our foundation.
There you go.
The next question I want to ask you, within the last 2 decades especially, there's been a lot of research and science coming to the forefront of physical training in general about the importance of how our body connects to the ground in which we operate on.
Absolutely.
So things like minimalist shoes, barefoot shoes,
Bare feet.
changing the shape of the shoes as we know it to allow a bigger toe box, more uninterrupted contact with the ground. Let's talk about proprioception.
Yeah, sure.
How important it is for any sort of athletic or performance goal to have an unimpinged and unhindered, unbuffered communication between one's feet and the ground.
Absolutely, because we're talking about the feet-mind connection, and it's like that's kind of what there's so much research and evidence out there that we need to feel our feet pretty much, because we sometimes when people get certain types of shoes where they have like this the air foam and they're extremely soft and everything, it's like the performance actually goes down because you don't have that communication. Your mind is like, hey, where am I at? What am I doing? What kind of terrain am I on? What are we trying to achieve? And if the brain can't focus on, hey, I can feel where I'm at, I know where I'm at, it's hard to send the right signals, right communication to the rest of your body to say, hey, I need to provide you with this. I need to provide this type of energy and tell your cells to act in this way. But if it because of the environment you're in, but if it doesn't know where you're at because you have so much sponge and cushion in your shoes, then you don't have any idea that communication is going to be hindered in some way. And so that's where it kind of get back to minimalist shoes, or my favorite, just bare feet. And if you can run in bare feet, you can train, you can lift in bare feet as much as possible because you're getting that communication there. The sensory, absorption, sensory receptors on the bottom of the feet are so important. And a lot of times, as human beings, especially these days, we never stimulate them. Go back because we're always wearing shoes. We have socks. We have all these different things that kind of breaks that communication. So grounding, for example, I'm a huge fan of grounding. If we can get out there for just 10 minutes a day, first thing in the morning, take our shoes and socks off and just stand and let our body kind of unite with the earth in a way that we normally don't do on a regular basis, that's going to go so far in helping us just have less inflammation, less cortisol in our body, help reset our CNS system from the parasympathetic to sympathetic system. So many different things that we can do, and it's just standing outside with your shoes and socks off. It costs you nothing, but it's there for us. So I think there's a lot of evidence, out there. We just don't tap into it very often. And like I said, even better at the beach, kind of get into, that fresh air by the ocean. And just there's so much research when we participate in these things that we just don't tap into. Why? Because, I don't know, maybe we don't find it as important. We're too busy, we don't know about it. I guess the list goes on. But yeah, we got to have that connection, because if the brain doesn't know where you're at as far as this environment, communication will be, sacrificed to some level. So
I can say that not knowing about it would probably be the vast majority of what many people face, because this is still very new findings. Talking about traditionally the way shoes have been shaped for hundreds of years up until this point. But let me ask you, the individual who has been wearing high 2-inch cushion running shoes for 10 years versus the person who has been wearing minimalist wide toe box shoes for 10 years, what differences can you expect to see in their feet?
Yeah, in the feet. Yeah, great question. So like I say, it's one of those things where, we look at the arches as well, because that arch and the stability and the Achilles tendon, and just when you watch the person walk, say you have an endurance athlete that, wears a large cushion shoe versus minimalist, so we have to make sure, and we take off both their shoes and socks and just kind of watch them walk. Okay, walk away from me and walk, towards me. You can see, the structure of the mobility of their Achilles tendon, of their ankles, of their arch, and things like that. Even the outsides of their feet as well, as far as the first and fifth metacarpal or metatarsal. I'm sorry. So it's one of those things that we want to make sure that we're supporting the individual. So I can't really say that all cushion shoes are bad. I can't really say all minimalist shoes are bad. I think that has to be depending on your sport, depending on the individual. Because, for example, I have a lot of people who wear the minimalist shoes, but they have flat feet. And so they don't have that arch, that natural arch support that helps them, prevents them from pronating. And they come in and they have a significant pain in their ankle and their Achilles tendon. So we got to have some kind of modification in that way. Versus the other person who wears the cushion shoes. A lot of times I find them maybe a little underdeveloped as far as the calf muscles or the strength in the quads and sometimes things like that, because they're not stimulating certain muscle groups for stability. It's not just lifting focusing on the big muscles, it's all the stability muscles as well, tendons, ligaments, and different muscle fibers. So I think each individual is different. So I can't say, oh my gosh, everybody needs to do this, everybody needs to do that. I think it has to be customized per person, depending on your sport, depending on the individual, depending on what comfort will allow too. Because again, I can't say you got to do this, but the person is extremely uncomfortable or it causes pain. So I think that's what I've seen the most when I'm trying to differentiate which shoe an individual should wear depending on the activity, the extreme, the cushion shoes, minimalist shoes, and anywhere in between. Then you talk about neutral shoes, stability shoes, motion control. So there's a lot of different options out there. But for a shoe based on your event, I think it needs to be customized to you for performance and as comfort will allow. So.
A lot of options out there to navigate that.
Too many sometimes. Too many. It's like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Where do I go? So I think that's where you get with a specialist, kind of talk about what your goals are, and then just give it a shot. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't, well then, we got to reevaluate.
So one thing that I loved talking to Steve about on this one was Steve is a marathon runner. He's competed in Ironman competitions before. So he, where I bring the perspective of a pro strongman, he brings the perspective of an Ironman and an endurance athlete. So someone who has used different types of footwear his whole life, and with the long duration stuff that he does, it's so essential for him to make sure that he has the appropriate footwear, the foundational structures in his shoe that help support his activity. But you do have very different needs depending on the person's activity level. And that is one thing I want to make very clear. But for the overwhelming majority of day-to-day tasks and just being a normal human, not running marathons, not even deadlifting, just being a human, walking around, having a foot that mimics or having a shoe that mimics our actual foot in terms of shape is essential for keeping your health and making sure that your feet stay strong throughout the course of your life. There are a lot of implications of less than ideal shoes in weightlifting specifically. And this all comes down to the fact that when you are weightlifting, you're doing constant repetitions with loads that are way in excess of normal day-to-day type strains. So there's significantly and exponentially increased consequence here. If I'm doing something poorly with just my body weight and nothing else, well, I can get by doing that for a much longer duration and quantity than if I'm doing something poorly with 600 pounds on my back. When I put that weight on my back, I have dramatically increased the consequence, the negative that I can take away from every single repetition. So it's a very high stakes time when you're weightlifting, because you are doing things that the work that you can get done in the face of the load can greatly outweigh the entire workload that you've done throughout the day outside of that gym training session. So with the significant increased consequence due to working out with a load, you want to make sure that when you are training, that your footwear, your foundation, your posture, all those boxes are checked off and leaves nothing for upward progress. Because just as there is a high consequence with weightlifting, there's also a high prospective gain due to these weight loads. If I'm doing something correctly in my day-to-day life, if I'm walking around correctly with posture correctly, if I'm sitting correctly with my abs engaged, that's got a good carryover. But I've got no additional weight strain on me, no additional resistance strain. So if I do those same things all perfectly and correctly while I'm weightlifting, while I've got 1,000 pounds hanging down from my shoulder, what I've taken away from that is going to dramatically outweigh a lot of these just day-to-day type things, because I have, again, done it in the face of that 1,000-pound load. The takeaway from these things is dramatic. So what I'm getting at with this topic, this area of the topic specifically, is when you are training, because it is in excess of just your body, you want to make sure that you have everything locked in. And this starts from the ground up, and this starts with your footwear. You know, you can have all the supportive gear you want. You can have the strongest shoulders in the world. You can just be an incredibly gifted genetic athlete. But if you are wearing crappy shoes that are squishy and not really letting you effectively communicate with the ground, you're limiting yourself from the get-go. It's literally the first thing that from between you and the ground, that's that first base. It's your footwear. You got to make sure it really works. So when it comes down to which shoes are best and when, you know, depending on the sport, it really dictates what type of footwear you should use. You know, if you are an alpinist, you know, mountain climber, you're going to have, you know, hiking boots to trek up to the alpine region of a mountain. And then once you get to the alpine, you're going to have some either really hefty rock climbing shoes, some crampons with blades on the bottom to dig into ice. If you're an endurance runner or an Ironman athlete, you're going to have some really good running shoes. Some running shoes that have a good supportive, you know, midsection to kind of cage your foot in, but also very squishy, meshy. They breathe well. They absorb impact. They give you a lot of rigidity to carry you over a long distance. Versus if you are in a weightlifting type application, you know, then you want to have that very flat, zero drop shoe. Zero drop meaning that the difference in height from your heel to your toe is zero. They're both at the same level, the way our natural foot should be. And you want to make sure that you are always in that very grounded type feel. Essentially, what it would feel like to be barefoot. The closer you can feel to barefoot, the better. But no matter what sport, with the exception of being an alpine climber or mountain climber, you want that wide toe box. And the reason I said with the exception of mountain climber is rock climbing shoes, mountain climbing shoes will be tapered. And that is specifically to mimic kind of like the goat's hoof, all that musculature coming down to a single point that can very easily lock into a ledge and push you back up. So that is one example of where we are changing the shape of the foot. But if you are wearing shoes like that to mountain climb, you better be doing your work outside of your mountain conquest to where you are wearing wide base shoes, maybe even wearing toe spreaders to pull your feet back apart, because we're not goats, people. I mean, this is the way our feet are meant to be, so you got to take care of them. But for me as a strongman, as a weightlifter, and just day-to-day as a human being, the minimalist shoes, and more specifically, barefoot shoes are the perfect to go. I fell in love with barefoot shoes the second I tried them on. And now I am an affiliate and an athlete working with barefoot, but I wasn't always. It wasn't until after I bought my first pair of barefoot shoes where, you know, I have a very wide foot, a size 14, 4E extra wide foot. Getting footwear was always just such a terrible endeavor for me. I could never find anything that really fit well. And then barefoot shoes came along. I ordered my first pair of barefoots, the Crimson Reds, the Kabuki crossover ones that came out a while back. And I tried them on, I wore them, and it was just life-changing. The second I put them on and started walking around and lifting them, I just felt this whole new level of connectivity to the ground that felt so empowering and refreshing in the light of all the other footwear I used, that I took it upon myself to reach out to Barefoot, and I just told them I love these shoes. They're everything that I've been looking for, and I consider myself to be a footwear geek at a certain point. And I asked them if there was any way that we could collaborate or work together in the future, then I would be more than interested to do so. And before I knew it, that turned out to me becoming a Barefoot affiliate. So I highly recommend them. I think they are just one of the best shoes out there. And if you are interested in getting your first pair of Barefoots, check out the link in my profile or any links that I post the YouTube videos to this podcast, and we can get you some barefoots while you're supporting the Texas Titan at the same time. But they were such a life changer for me to where I reached out to the company and wanted to be involved with them. So that's as good a testimony as any. But remember, people, our physical power begins from the ground up. The connection that we have to the ground greatly dictates our ability to use our power and to what extent we can use it too. So, moving on to the last topic of conversation today. And this is a big one that I get a lot of questions on all the time because it's an inevitable one that we will surely face at a certain point, and that's dealing with the onset of injury. Such a dark time that it can be because, especially from the perspective of a strength athlete, sooner or later, you're going to get hurt. We can strive for perfection as best we can, and we can get very damn close to walking that line well, but at some point, just from the nature of this beast, from the imperfection of our bodies, from probability and chance, injury will happen at some point. So how do you navigate those injuries? Because there is a lot of mental lows associated with it, and the last thing you want to do is be dwelling down at the bottom of a pit of sorrow when you can be making progress towards making yourself better and, most importantly, not letting those injuries happen again. Before we go into it any further, let's check back and hear from Steve Martinez.
Last question I have for you is a big one.
Sure.
It's on the realm of injury.
Yeah.
I'm going to paint a picture for you. I'm deadlifting. Things are going really well. I get to my heavy sets. On the way up of my first rep of my heavy set, I feel a pop come from my lower back.
Yeah.
Big warning sign.
Yep.
You know, something's happened. I'm freaking out. What is the ideal way to navigate that for those first initial 30 minutes, those first couple of hours on the onset of an injury?
Right.
How is the best way to go about taking care of one's body?
First and foremost, stop. Immediately stop. A lot of times people try to push, oh, hey, I got a little tweak here, I got a little twinge here. I'll push through it. Especially with the big muscles, your back, your knee, your shoulder, things like that. We got to stop because there's so many things that could be going on within that in that moment, that situation that you just experienced immediately. So first and foremost, just stop. A lot of times after that, it's just kind of monitor, kind of see how you feel. Okay, say you had a pop in your back, you kind of say, okay, try to evaluate the situation. Was it just a pop and like, okay, a little tweak the muscle, or was it a herniated disc, depending on the situation. So I think, just kind of stop the activity, kind of give yourself a little bit of time to walk around, maybe do a little stretch here and there, see how it feels, evaluate the situation, because a lot of times, we don't realize the extent of the injury until, 24 hours later. And so if you kind of say, oh no, I'm good to go, I'll go back, we can be creating a huge issue that we have no idea we're creating. So I think that's going to be one of the main things too. Now, again, after you evaluate the situation, you differentiate, hey, is this more of a muscle situation, a tendon, maybe a ligament? Is it a bone? Is it a disc situation? Then we got to take the proper steps after that. Anywhere from massage to heat. We want heat. We don't really want to put ice on it right away unless it have significant swelling, because we want those inflammatory factors that your body is trying to send to that area. It actually promotes healing. So inflammation and pain, I know we don't enjoy it a lot of times and kind of takes us out of the game. But that's actually a good thing because that's going to help promote healing. So even when people talk about, oh, I got to pop all this ibuprofen, Aleve, Tylenol for the pain, I get that. But at the same time, what we're doing is we're impacting and we're withholding our body's natural inflammatory factors that actually promote healing. Because when we have pain and stiffness, it's our brain telling our body, hey, we have something going on right there. We need to heal it. So we don't want you to move. That's why we have, again, the swelling, the stiffness, the pain. Almost like your body is trying to create a natural cast in a way. Hey, don't move it. I got to heal it. But if we're taking medication to block those receptors, then your body gets into a point where you're kind of battling it back and forth. It actually could prolong the injury. So we have to be careful with that. So I think that, like I said, at the moment we got to stop. We have to evaluate, and there's no harm in taking the rest of the day off. No, there's no harm in taking the rest of the day off, because stopping one workout for that day isn't going to destroy your whole career or training for the event. But if you keep on pushing and now you have a significant injury, you might need to pull out. So that's one of the things that we got to be careful and realize that, hey, one training moment or one exercise or one event that you're preparing for isn't going to crush your dreams of performing well for the event. So just keep that in mind as well.
Two individuals here. Individual one, they feel that pop come from their lower back within 30 minutes. No real changes to themselves. They know something happened. Right. Might be some slight inflammation, but no real changes.
Right.
Individual two, they feel that pop come from their back. Within minutes, movement quality of life, immediate pain, have all taken negative hits.
Right.
For each individual, what are the do's and don'ts of what you should do in immediate response to that? Like I'm talking first 24 hours.
Sure.
Versus what you shouldn't do, and just big factors that come to mind immediately.
Yeah, because I kind of know my back history. It's like
That's why I asked.
Significant history. When it comes to that, surgeries, and unfortunately for myself and everything. So I think for individual one, if you're like, hey, you know what, maybe it was just something minor. No big deal, right? If you want to go back to the event, start low and go slow. Take off that weight. Like I said, one event, one training exercise. Like for me, it was like, hey, one bike ride, one run, one swim isn't going to crush my hopes of performing well during my triathlon. It's not. So we want to start low and go slow. So I'd say go back into it. Take off a lot of the weight, maybe reduce it by like 70%. Just kind of go with emotion. Kind of listen to your body. Your body will talk to you to make sure that we're not causing more harm. So that's what I would do with that. And then kind of continually reevaluate, within the next 24 hours, because sometimes we have a little injury, then we're fine, then we wake up the next morning and what happens? Whoop, totally different world. So that's one thing I would do. The second thing I would do for individual number two is, again, if it comes to a point where it's like, hey, now I have like a bamboo spine where I can't move, I can't touch my toes, I'm in trouble here. At that point, I would take some anti-inflammatories because we got to get you out of that crisis moment. That's going to be something significant. And then I would call a medical professional, really, at that time. Don't mess around this, because the back, especially, with all the nerve fibers and the discs and everything that's attached to it, we have to make sure that we're not, simplifying the situation or overlooking anything. So we got to evaluate certain things, anywhere from how am I walking, my mobility, do I have numbness and tingling going down my legs into my toes? Is it affecting my ability to urinate? Is it affecting my ability to properly digest? All of these things we need to ask ourselves and evaluate because, it can seize your body up and you can be miserable for a long time. So I think it's always a good idea to figure out if we're going to figure out what we have first. If we don't know what we have, we can't fix it. So getting down to that root cause and not just continuing with Tylenol, ibuprofen, Aleve, anti-inflammatories, NSAIDs, but to really use them for the moment, get you out of the crisis mode, great, not a problem. But then we got to figure out what we have, whether that comes with an x-ray, whether that comes with go to a physical therapist, whether that comes from an MRI or something like that. I think the responsible thing to do is to get the proper imaging. Again, so we know what we have. Once we figure out what we have, we'll know what to do. And that would be my suggestion.
Last question on this topic. Static stretching in the immediate time following an injury.
Yeah.
Good or bad?
I think it could be a good thing because you got to kind of test things out. But I wouldn't go too hard, as comfort will allow. So say you hurt your shoulders, like, man, my shoulder's, kind of talking to me a little bit. So let me just kind of see, where we're at. You're kind of testing the water, getting that information, educating yourself on the moment in the injury that just happened. Because if you're like, whoa, kind of zinging at you, I don't want you to force it. We got to listen to our body. And sometimes you see people say they tweak their shoulder. What do they do? They kind of go like this, right? They kind of go like that. What they're doing is they're sending that communication to the brain as far as, hey, what do I have here? Help me figure this out because I have a situation that I got to heal from. So I think that's kind of one of the main things. So I think that it could be, but also dynamic stretching, because we got to figure out the reason why. If we have an injury, we got to figure out why. So whatever we got to do at that moment to start low and go slow, don't make the injury worse, but to figure out, hey, what can I do, to kind of figure out what do I have here? Do I feel like any burning, clicking, catching, popping, grinding, things like that is always a good thing. So I don't want you to force it, but really use it so you get that information and education about what you have going on.
It's a very tricky time to navigate, and it's always one filled with so much mental distress as well. But golden nuggets of information as always, Steve.
Yeah,
really
my pleasure.
It. Thank you for it.
Anytime, brother.
I loved how the first thing that Steve said when injury happens is to stop. And I mean, that's very obviously true. When you have any sort of injury, no matter what it is, especially if you're doing a physical task, you got to listen to these signs that your body gives you. When you feel the pain sensation, that is your body. The pain sensation itself is your body giving you a sign that something is wrong. So in that moment of not knowing what it is, the first struggle is you got to figure out what it is first. Figure out what it is, get to the bottom of it, and make sure that, one, that's not life-threatening, and two, that it's something that you're aware of and how to keep it from getting worse, and that you just have some control over it, because when something happens, you don't have control over it. That's why it happened in the first place. Not having control, especially when there's pain involved, has to change immediately. But what are the phases of first response to an injury? Number one, you stop and assess. You collect data. I'm always big on collecting data in terms of real-time feedback of what our body gives us as we're training and working. So you're something happens. You feel a pop come from your back, for example, and you don't know how bad it is, exactly what area it's affected. Stop, assess. Let's drop the load, stand up for a little bit, see how it feels to hold normal posture. Maybe let's reach around and start palpating the local area, see where exactly has that tender spot. Just collect the data. What feedback can you get from your body? What signs is it going to tell you? Is it going to start seizing up on you? Is it going to start locking up on you? Has it changed your ability to move around well? Are you in constant pain, or was it immediate pain? Try to collect as much data as you can without doing anything further to possibly worsen the situation. And as you're doing this is going to be the hardest thing to do, but maintain a clear and focused headspace. If you start going down that path of self-destruction and just like, I can't believe I did this, I can't believe this is happening, my whole career is gone, I've ruined it all, like I'm going to be a failure, this is the end of my story, whatever it is. You got to get yourself out of that negative headspace, because here's the reality, and this is the unsugar-coated version, is whatever is done. It's already happened. You are going to accomplish nothing for yourself by wallowing in self-pity and misery. Instead, what you are going to need to do is focus all of your efforts towards moving forward, towards fixing the issues, towards making sure that they don't happen again. So as you maintain this clear headspace, this is what's going to give you that clarity to focus on what actually starts to make differences. Now you get to begin your appropriate therapies. If this is a medical emergency or is significantly affecting your quality of life, then you need to seek medical attention right away. But start to begin the appropriate therapies. If it's actively stretching, if it's CBD rubs, if it's a foam roller, if it's an E-stim unit, whatever it is, this greatly depends on what signs your body is giving you and to how the degree is that you're hurt. Start to begin those therapies. With the data that you've collected, with the signs you've gotten, as you maintain this clear headspace, now you can start to research your findings. Take to the web, take to the internet, see if there's other people that have experienced these same things. Something I like to do is whenever I have a muscle strain is go straight to Google and look at your anatomy charts. Pinpoint the exact muscle, the exact attachment point. See it on those very clear, broken down anatomy charts as to where you're feeling. Once you know exactly what muscles affected and ailed, you are so much more well equipped on strategies to how to fix it and to alleviate pain and to strengthen it through therapies. But when you are researching these things online, the internet can be a very daunting place. Take what you find with a grain of salt in terms of what people are telling you went wrong with you, because you start Google doctoring yourself, and it is very easy to find the worst case possible scenarios that might not even be remotely close to what you have. So the objective with this research is compiling data, just like before, and trying to figure out through accumulation of many different data points what best describes what you're feeling. Because then you can take these findings to a professional that you're going to go seek out if you need a professional. But understand that there's always a way to move forward. This is the next step. The past is behind and the future is ahead. like I said, we don't want to dwell in that negative space, but even if you've popped off a muscle or you're requiring some sort of surgery, the worst case scenario, right? There's still a way to move forward. If I tear my bicep, I still have a whole nother arm to work. I still have all of my legs. I can easily use this time to start working on weaknesses that I might not have been able to focus on so much because I had a fully working body that was just not allowing me that time to pinpoint on these narrow things. There's always silver linings to these injuries. And there's always a way to keep moving forward. The only way that you will not keep moving forward is if you stay in a negative headspace and keep yourself with a clouded mind. Clouded minds are no good. You need to be able to envision the road ahead. And when you do have that clarity and you can see the road ahead, it makes it all the much easier to commit to a process of long-term recovery and the efforts needed to preserve that future of total health. And a lot of this involves getting in contact with a professional. Even if it's a muscle sprain, when you've found what muscle is ailed, when you've found how this could possibly have happened, present it to a therapist, to a doctor, and now we can very easily, or to a coach, we can very easily tailor a therapy program to aim at getting you back on track as quick as possible by recovering the hurt muscle, by allowing you to still work other muscles while it recovers effectively without hurting it, and by paving and fortifying any weaknesses that were there in the first place that contributed to this injury. And that goes to the last facet, or the last stage of dealing with injury, and that's learning from the injury to help prevent the reoccurrence. Because you have to think every time that your body breaks down on you as an opportunity to learn. It is not good for our body to break down on us. We don't like it. We don't like being less than ourselves. We don't like being hurt. And you can learn so much to make you a better athlete, a more resilient human being, and someone who can better care for other people that are possibly under their wing if you're in a coaching capacity or a role model capacity at some point. But take away as much as you can, because the reality of an injury is you took your body to a limit and you found that limit. The limit may have overcome you at that point, but the limit is there and you know where it is. That better equips you for navigating and teetering back and forth while walking the line on that limit in the future. The worst thing you can do from an injury is not learn anything at all from it, because what's to say it's not going to happen again at that point? So you got to keep those things in mind. It is, I've been hurt many times, some worse than others. I've had injuries that require surgery, and it's the hardest thing to pull yourself out of that mental rut. Knowing that your progress that you are making is going to take a significant and swift blow. But there's always a way forward. And even in the midst of feeling that your immediate progress is going to be slowed, there are ways that you can preserve your future progress and start working to it too, some of which I got to talk about right now. But if you're having problems dealing with injuries or the onset of injuries, I'm hoping that you found some information here useful. You're always welcome to reach out to me. I mean, myself and any of the other athletes that have walked this line for a while, we've dealt with our fair share of injuries. We have tips and we have strategies, and you're not alone out there. That is the worst thing to think of. But I sourced some questions on Instagram to see if any of you all had any questions to ask on these topics that were at play. So Ethana13 says, how do you adhere and overcome the mental block after recovering from an injury? And that's just like I was talking about. This is one of the hardest things to do. This is kind of this mental pre-training that you have to do with yourself, and getting to effectively and efficiently realize in your day-to-day life that whenever something has already happened, that's just it. It's already happened. You don't have control over anything in the past. You don't, as much as we would like to. But you do have control of everything that happens from that point forward. And that is a power in yourself that you always have. And when you realize that power is there, it kind of, especially if you can do it effectively and know that you have control of the future, that gives you all the power that you need to tune out the negatives that have already happened and to start channeling your efforts to the positives. And when you, don't get me wrong, it's not a one and done deal. There's going to be times in dealing with this injury where you're going to be, on social media, seeing friends, rivals, people that you look to, and they're finding constant success and progress, and it's going to suck because you're stuck dealing with an injury. The lesser individual will be overcome by all those negative forces triggering a negative response. The more powerful individual will see these as motivating factors and use it to kindle the fire to make themselves better and to not dwell on negative so that they can use all their efforts towards constructively building a stronger and more resilient individual. So it's easier said than done in a lot of ways, but absolutely essential when it comes to getting out of that mental rut. BAM95 asks, overcoming the fear of re-injury when coming back after one, a lower back injury specifically. So I guess Bam is asking how to overcome the fear of re-injury. I remember when I tore my bicep back in 2013. I went to 2014 National to support my wife when she was competing, and I was still recovering from that bicep injury. And the hardest thing I was having the time with was getting back to Atlas stones. And I was just feeling like that pickup off the ground was so much stress and strain, immediately going to that afflicted area at the bicep tendon that got reattached. And I saw John Anderson there, and he was one of the judges there at that Nationals in Reno. And I knew he had torn biceps before. I knew he was a strong man. And I asked him, John, after tearing a bicep, how do you get back to doing stones? And he looked at me and told me, he's like, Gabe, just don't be a little bitch and do it. and it was a comical bluntness that I will never forget, because after a certain point, I think I had already been close to a year of recovery at that point. You got to stop babying it. You got to trust that these connective tissues have recovered, have started to flourish in terms of their healing, and now it's time to test them. So what I will say to Bam, the challenge with lower back injuries is wanting to get back to pushing yourself too hard, too fast. And even in that example I used of myself talking to John Anderson and him telling me to, toughen up, I could take that well because I had already let so much time transpire in my recovery regimen, in my therapies, in healing, to where, okay, now let's just really try it. Even if it's giving me these signs like there's a high point of tension, it's feeling tough, you have to trust in your recovery efforts. Now, if you are not going about recovery well, if you have not included a professional to do therapies, then you are at a disadvantage because you don't have that layer of insurance in knowing that you are getting the full comprehensive recovery needed, to where if you did challenge it, if you did test it, would it be able to keep up with you? There go my Huskies again. You might be able to hear that on the recording there, but make sure that you do your part in having a full and comprehensive recovery regimen. Okay, Semi-Obese asks, have you had to deal with any bulging discs? When it comes to bulging discs, herniated discs, that is always the holy grail and the epitome of what we want to avoid in strength endeavors, especially deadlifts and squats, anything that involves a hip hinge at the lower back. I have never had an MRI done on my back to see if I have bulging discs or herniated discs. There is that part of me that does not want to see, because I feel fine now. Don't get me wrong. I wake up on days very sore and stiff sometimes, and there are times where I do a session and maybe I did something a wrong way and my back is feeling it for, a couple days, maybe a week after. But I have definitely thrown my back out many times, but I've never gotten any imaging done. I would imagine that being one of the strongest deadlifters in the world, that my spine could tell a tale. And I don't necessarily want to read that tale on an image right away, because I feel great right now. I don't feel like anything crippling me or really handicapping me. So I would rather not know even if there are bulges there, because whatever I'm doing right now, it is keeping them at bay. And whether it's the core strength I have, whether it's my postural awareness, I'm doing a good job. So I might very well have some bulges and herniations there that I just don't know about. But unless there's a point in time where my quality of life is significantly impacted to where I need to get this imaging done, that's not something that I'm gonna do to confirm. But What I will tell you, Samael, is even if I do have bulges or herniated discs, for anyone else out there who is dealing with these spinal injuries, that's not a death sentence. There are plenty of the world's elite powerlifters, strongmen, world record setters who are performing these feats of incredible strength with spinal injuries. Now, the key here with these bulging discs and herniated discs is that you have an issue at the very core of your spine with how the discs support each vertebra. So if you have a negative force go to that area of weakness, that's a problem. But in order to get down there to the core, to your spine, you have to go through so many layers of supporting core muscles to get there. What I'm getting at is if you can get your core strong enough, negative forces will never have the power to penetrate that deep into your spine. And that's the secret for a lot of these elite level weightlifters, is they have developed such a good postural awareness, such a good core strength, that nothing has the opportunity to even get down to their bulges or their herniated discs. So if you're asking me this, Sam, because you're dealing with some spinal injuries yourself, prioritize your ability to strengthen your core and to be a master of core bracing so that whatever load you're moving, it is always carried by the core itself and never goes all the way down to that final layer of defense at your spine. Okay, so F-Bomb8 asks, I know they say it's you versus you, but is it important to look at the competitions and their numbers? So your competitors and how they're doing. At the end of the day, it always is you versus you. You can try to compare yourself to others, but everyone has a different situation and circumstance in their own life. You always have control over your efforts and what you give on any given day. You always have control over how good your training session is, what exercises you do, what exercises you don't do. You can, when it comes time to competition, to go to competition, you can think about all the adversaries or the rivals or the competitors that you're going to face, and you can start filling and crowding your mind with all that information and that worry. Or you can keep in your mind how important it is for you to lay down the foundation to all the movements you're going to need to test yourself on and to just give it your all on that. I do understand what you're saying, though, and there is a point in competition, especially let's use the strongman competition for the sake of this conversation, where it's a points game. You have 5 or 6 events, and it is accumulation of points from start to finish, and who comes out on top. Because you have to last a whole day of competing, and you have to preserve your performance on event 6 just as much as event 1. If there are events throughout that contest where you are a clear victor, or you are doing a much better job on than a lot of the other athletes, you keep tabs on their score, because you might not need to do nearly as much as you think you have to. What I'm getting at is maybe you only need to do 2 or 3 reps at a weight because no one else could get more than that, when you know you're fully capable of doing 10. But if you went all the way to 10, that's going to significantly drain your tanks to where it might take away from your performance on any remaining events. So if that ties into what you're saying, that's where you need to kind of keep tabs of, at least to some degree, of how your competitors are doing, so that you preserve yourself from not having to do more than you have to and save your energy for when it counts, because it always comes down to that last event. And you will have guys who just blew their load way too early before they even get there, and that winds up jeopardizing their potential victory. But it is you versus you all the time. You can sit there in your, dungeon of training, looking at the mirror and thinking to yourself, oh, I wish I was as good as this guy on the other side of the world. Look what he's doing on social media, stuff like that. That's not going to do anything for you. What is going to do something for you is looking up at yourself, catching your gaze in the mirror, and realizing that you are the one in complete control of what you get out, because you are in control of what you put in. Moving on to the next one. Let's see. Heavy Timber. George Lucito asks, you like programming different height deadlifts. What's the method to the madness? I've gone over it before. One of my core philosophies with deadlifting is, if you can be good at deadlifting any bar from any height, any reps, any deficit, any time frame, whatever, then you're a master at whatever type of deadlift gets thrown at you. And in strongman, the deadlift power is greatly translated over to a lot of the other events. Your ability to pick up a stagnant weight off the ground is incredibly useful, incredibly useful. So for me, when you start moving that bar height around, you change at what point the dead weight is felt. You change at what point whether you need to have a knee dominant lift or a hip dominant lift. And I say that loosely just to kind of picture where it comes into play. But train every deadlift bar from every height. Hex bar, Ukrainian, axle, barbell, frame, car deadlift. Train it all. If you get good at every single one of them, then, I mean, that carries over to all of your strength, and you're a master at that point. So there is a method to the madness. If any of you are more curious as to what that madness might entail, reach out. I've got some openings on my online coaching. Sniper, the Majestic Raven, asks, what was your first major injury and how did you deal with that? My first major injury was my bicep tear that I alluded to back in 2013. It was right after my first strongman competition win. It was my first competition that I had done, and it was my first win. 2 days later, I got back to training, and I was training an axle clean and press, very rookie at the time, and I paused on the way up with the clean and that underhand grip on the bar. As soon as I went back up, it just snapped right off my bicep from the bone. Right here. You got, for those of you watching the video, you can see that scar. Still there, still reminding me of it. And as soon as it happened, I felt the muscle, it was like popping silly putty, just a pah! And it rolled all the way up to my shoulder. I knew what had happened, and I was just heartbroken. Coming off of that momentum of a first victory in my first ever competition, after that victory, it was just like, wow, sky's the limit. Look at this road ahead of me. I'm going to be great. And then it all comes crumbling down in that moment that I felt my muscle retract and roll back up. It was my first real injury, so I had never really dealt with that before, with a muscle popping off. I was distraught. I was training with my wife on that time. I remember just like being in tears, not from pain, but in tears from being heartbroken. We were driving to the hospital because it was, my muscle had popped off. I thought we got to go to the ER. But the reality is, with the bicep tear, don't go to the ER. Don't go to the ER. You will wait till you can get into an orthopedic surgeon and schedule your surgery, because the ER, all they do is they check you into a room, they give you some ibuprofen, and they tell you not to weightlift again, and you wind up being out $800 to $1,200. So, but from that point on, I started because I was so fresh out of my first win, motivation was still high. Even in light of all the crappy feelings, motivation was very high, and I started training unilaterally. I had one good arm. I made sure to keep that arm moving well, because I knew our body tries to keep symmetry. If I train one side of my body is more inclined to keep that other side right up to strength with it. So I kept training one side of my body. I kept up with leg training. I would deadlift with a strap whenever I could. I just kept moving forward. And it was a long road, but a road that I went through, and I kept my eyes on the future, and it led me with the ability to keep making progress and not to be stuck in a rut. So moving on to the next one. Let's see. How do we program things so that we don't overload, but also miss out? This is from Jaime868. How do we program things so that we don't overload, but that we also don't miss out? Miss out on muscle growth or gains. So here's the thing, Jaime, and this is to just put it in a very quick nutshell. You have 7 days a week, right? You want to train maybe 4 or 5 out of those days so that you can allow ample recovery in between. All right, so there's that. 4 or 5 training days out of a 7-day week. After those 7 days, or in those 7 days, those 4 or 5 days, you have an upper body, you have a lower body. A lot of people give so much priority to their upper body and their arms. They'll spend 3 or 4 out of those 5 days all on upper body. Your lower body is half your body. Make sure that you spend half of your time on half that body and half the time on the other body. So a good training week, in my opinion, will be 4 days. You got a squat powered leg day. You got a shoulder day. You have a deadlift day and a back day. And then you have an event training day. Usually that is a good way to where you can split up your body into halves. You get 2 lower body days and possibly 2 shoulder days, with the other one being on that event day at the end. But plan out your weeks, plan out your months. Find a balance between the days where you are training super high heavy weight low reps and super high reps low weight. Very early on, I kind of found the cube method for both powerlifting by Brandon Lilly and for strongman by Josh Thigpen. And the cube method was a rotation to where you would switch between high weight, low rep strength days, medium rep, medium weight speed days, and high rep, low weight volume days, and kind of that switch across all of your different muscle groups at different timings to where each week you were working a different mode. And kind of having that switch between the weight, the speed, and the volume was a good way to make sure that you never really overload your muscles and cause real significant, tremendous strain while still being able to train them, because you need to have the endurance, you want to have the hypertrophy, and you want to have the strength. But if you're training if you're training one of those constantly back to back to back, you're going to start allowing for breakdowns. So try to have a rotation between the heavy stuff, the medium stuff, and the light stuff. And that's going to make it very fulfilling when you circle back to the heavy stuff and you realize how much you grew from doing the speed stuff and the medium weight volume stuff. But any further question on that, I've got availability under my wing as a coach. So that is all I have time for on the questions right now. I want to finish out with a very short space out section. And this is going to be an immediate space in terms of reflecting at our Earth. Let's space out for a bit. As I said, I'm heading out to Daytona for the 2022 official Strongman Games. I'll be commentating there with Big Laws, Lawrence Chalet, and my flight plans got canceled because tropical storm turning into Hurricane Nicole is hitting Florida right where I'm supposed to be going. I think back to World's Strongest Man in 2020, and the memories are still fresh from when we had a hurricane there, and that dramatically impacted the show that year. And I just don't want to be in Florida for hurricanes. It's just one of my biggest things. And sure enough, I thought I was clear in November. I thought I was clear flying out to Florida and not having a hurricane to worry about. But sure enough, there's a hurricane. And Hurricane Nicole will be the first hurricane in 40 years to make landfall on the U.S. in November. This is so late in the year, but I bring this up because you hear all this talk about climate change. You hear all this talk about weather patterns changing, extreme weather. And it's like, people, here's your freaking sign. We have a hurricane so late in the year in November. Things are changing here on Earth. And we need to know that it's true, because you think of the immediate impact, especially there in Florida. You have many areas of the state that are there still recovering from the erosion effects of Hurricane Ian only a few weeks ago. And with that in mind, with these weather patterns changing, with more extreme weather later on in the year, we're going to see a dramatic impact both economically to where how the cities are able to keep up with these extreme weather patterns, making sure that infrastructure stays open, making sure that loss of life is at a minimum. And even furthermore, you have a lot of biodiversity challenges here in terms of the animals that are indigenous to the area. In November, this is a time when a lot of animals migrate from colder temperatures to more tropical, warmer regions. But if they're migrating to regions that are plagued by hurricanes in parts of the year that they didn't used to be there, this can affect migratory routes, and this can affect places where these animals, birds specifically, would stay due to erosion factors. So I bring this up because it's one of those things that it had been touted for so long that we're going to start seeing more hurricanes. We're going to start seeing them later in the years, and there will be a point where, if this keeps up, the amount of eastern shoreline of the coast, especially Florida, that we're going to be able to see from space might look very different in 10, 20 years from now, just from erosion and constant bombardment of storms. I was just giving that a lot of thought, and that's something that It's a very short and concise space out. But, you know, I've also noticed here home in Texas that it doesn't get cold anymore. You know, by this time of the year, we would have already had some cold days, but we've had some cool days, no cold days. It doesn't get cold anymore. We're getting hurricanes late in the season now. We're seeing more fires throughout mountainous parts of the country that are just destroying huge, lush ecosystems. I think we all really need to take a moment of pause and reflect on how these things are changing and what power we have as citizens of this planet to either mitigate those changes, to pave a way forward to a future that doesn't result in catastrophic events or loss of life or loss of habitat, and just shed some thought onto this whole thing as in general, because we do have a changing planet. At one point, whether it's in our lifetime, our child's lifetime, or their children's lifetime, is going to be a very different planet Earth than the one that we grew up on. And I'm always optimistic for the future, but this hurricane right now, it's not a bad hurricane, Category 1, but it's still a hurricane, and it is enough to kind of get those gears turning like, this is real. There is change taking place. Weather patterns are not the same that they used to be. And it almost haunts the back of my mind as to what will our world look like in 10 years. What will the eastern coast of the U.S. look like? How late will hurricanes go throughout the season? Will there be a hurricane season, or will it just be all year round? These are questions that kind of plague my mind. But I will be driving out to Florida shortly, hoping to avoid a lot of the weather damage or infrastructure changes along the way. And I really look forward to the official Strongman Games taking place. It's going to be a weekend full of power. I cannot wait to see a bunch of friendly faces and kindle the flames of power wherever they may lie. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Titan Talk. I am Gabe Pena, the Texas Titan. I will see you next time. Stay safe, stay curious, and keep looking up.